Shira McCown.
Yeah.
The floor is yours because Daniel gave a hint to your story. So what is your story going on? What is going on?
Joe Biden's tone-deaf and misguided campaign said on Monday that the former vice president does not support calls to defund the police amid growing calls to do so by activists across the country. Biden campaign spokesman Andrew Bates told reporters, quote, he hears and shares the deep grief and frustration of those calling out for change and is driven to ensure that justice is done and that we put a stop to this terrible plan, Bates added. Biden supports the urgent need for reform, including funding for public schools, summer programs, and mental health and substance abuse treatment separate from funding for police so that officers can focus on the job of policing. So calls to defund police have grown amid nationwide protests over the death of George Floyd, who died after Minneapolis officer knelt on his neck for nearly 9 minutes during an arrest. I want to remind everybody right now that we've been defunding education for a really long time. Defunding the police is not something to be afraid of. I read an Atlantic interview that was taking place 2 days ago with Alex Vitale, which actually that gives a precursor to Daniel's later story. He's the author of The End of Policing, which we have an interview with to show later of him. But he says that police budgets are massive. The Oakland Police Department receives nearly half of the city's discretionary spending. That is more than human services, parks and recreation, and transportation combined. Minneapolis, where George Floyd was killed, passed a budget in December, and it increased its budget for police by $10 million to a total of $193 million. Here's what they're spending on other things: $31 million for affordable housing, $250,000 for community organizations working with at-risk youth. Yeah, they really care. And $400,000 for the Office of Crime Prevention. New York City has the biggest police budget in the country, and they're cutting the police departments by 0.39%. The NYPD budget is $6 billion. They're cutting it by a tiny sliver, whereas the Department of Youth and Community Development, which funds after-school programs, literacy services, and summer youth programs, is losing 32% of its budget. This is all to say police get a ton of money, and their budgets aren't really being cut very much across the country. More than the Department of Health, the Department of Homeless Services and Department of Youth Services, and the Department of Employee Services combined. It's larger than the GDP of 50 countries around the world. So in New York, they want to cut the education department by over $600 million, but the proposal for the police department is only a cut of $23 million. And just to remind you, 8% of all male homicides in the United States are committed by police. And that the solution to this is not more training and more policing. Policing is a tool of violence that has historically been used to facilitate gross inequities and systems of exploitation like slavery, colonialism, the breaking up of unions, and the suppression of workers' rights movement.
So, okay, just like we said before about Joe Biden, nothing will fundamentally change. And I was listening to the radio, I was driving to the studio, and Trump being Trump, he's very transparent. At least you know where you stand with him. At least when he speaks to people, you understand what he really thinks about you. He's up front with his bullshit. And, he's a horrible individual that should be in charge. But right now he is saying, Biden's not the law and order president. He wants to defund. I'm law and order. And what does the Biden and the Democrats do? Because they don't have a backbone, because they are spineless, because somebody like Joe Biden wants to look tough to Republican voters, I guess. He's like, no, I'm not going to defund police. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to turn a blind eye to it. Because remember, Joe Biden, he remains still unapologetic for the 1994 crime bill that he signed. So, to Generation Z, because you guys are going to be up next, Joe Biden, you guys vote for however you feel like, but just remember, the reason why things are the way they are is because of somebody like Joe Biden. And just check on your smartphones, check on your computers. You'll see firsthand that this guy has voted on the wrong side of history. He was against LGBTQ rights. He was against desegregation. He was against busing. He was for the war in Iraq. He was for supporting the credit card corporations in 2005, making student debt for what it is right now. So, yeah, Joe Biden. Now, I'm not going to defund the police. Again, another reason why I'm not voting with this neoliberal Democrat. I'm going to vote third party. I live in a solid blue state, so vote blue no matter who, people. Go ahead, debate me on as much as you want, but your guy's a flawed candidate, and maybe there's a chance he wins. But then there you go. Your guy's in. What's going to change? Absolutely nothing. Daniel.
Yeah, so I think all of this stuff that we're talking about is, well, obvious. It's obvious if you do any amount of research that this is the way things work. And it's like, I was just thinking about the whole defunding movement. We're getting into that a little bit later. But isn't it ridiculous, like Kira pointed out as well, we're spending proportionately in municipalities on police and violence that the nation does in its federal budget on the military. Isn't that kind of like we always talk about, like, wow, the military budget's like half the money we spend federally goes to bombs and blowing stuff up.
Yeah.
But that's also true of municipals. It's half.
That's right.
So it's like, okay, wait a minute. We're in America. The way that we build up a good country is by increasing the GDP, if you're looking at it from that point of view, of the country. So how does putting people in prison increase the GDP? It increases GDP of perhaps prisons. Here's the other thing. I understand why, but I'm going to go in two different directions. If you think about it, isn't it interesting that the Democratic mayors and the Democrats are so aligned with police? The police who overwhelmingly vote Republican. It's not their voting base at all. If you look in Chicago, a huge majority of the police vote Republican. And they're in very concentrated areas, so they kind of get the people they want in those districts. And the Democrats stand behind them. And so usually you'd say, okay, well, in a rules for rulers sense, well, that would be the reason you'd stand with them, is you want to make, it's the same reason you'd say that they should stand by with teachers. But the truth is, again, this is the similarity between both parties, they both want to protect the wealth of their actual important people. And that's your millionaires, that's your billionaires, that's your people that cap out donations or have super PACs. Those people want police. Those people want you suppressed. They want you suppressed every single day. And they don't care if the taxes go one way or another, as long as it's going to the police, because they have their own private armies that they can hire. They have their own private doctors that they can hire. They don't care if, a reduction of 2 police officers maybe allows the city to hire 4 social workers that in turn lead to an instance where you need 5 less police officers because there's less crime because people are taken care of. America's toolbox for domestic policing, let's say, or the domestic administration is a bag full of hammers. There's no screwdriver. There's no tape. There's no glue. There's no joints. There's nothing else in that bag but hammers. So every time a job site comes up and they go do that over there, you get a guy with a bag of hammers that come in and starts hammering in screws, trying to combine things with a hammer. It doesn't work. It never could. It is designed so that they have a guy with a bag of hammers all the time, so that if someone they don't like, they can say, go hit that guy with a hammer.
Just the way you describe me, I could just see some guy in a bag just hammering it. Like, dude, what are you doing? And then all of a sudden he's like, don't like my job? Whack.
Yeah, exactly.
This is all I got, dude.
This is all I got. Yeah, I know. It's so stupid. And who's ever advising Joe Biden, whoever his handler is.
Yeah,
I mean, seriously, come on. This is... Like, here's the thing. Like, at this point, Biden has a nomination. It's over. Bernie Sanders is not going to unsuspend his campaign. But I was talking with Daniel just before the show even started. You have COVID-19 that reveals why we need to have Medicare for all. You have this economic depression, why we need to regulate Wall Street, big banks, and major corporations and tax the rich. And then you have this thing with police brutality and how we can, reallocate the funds and actually create better infrastructure for our cities and stop police brutality and making sure that we end this prison industrial complex. These are things like as if the gods gathered together and created this scenario perfect for Bernie Sanders to step up and get his message out there. I mean, if there was anything that was tailor-made with a big bow on it and said, to Bernie, from the gods, please save the world, and Bernie just casts it aside and gives it off to Biden, he looks at it and just throws it in the garbage. And Joe Biden, I'm not going to defund. Like, I'm curious to see how this.
I'm glad that he's listening to all the people he's listening to.
Yeah, of course. Like in the first story, he needs to listen to the young people. The young people wanted to fund the police. People of all ages. People of all ages right now are stepping up. The protests are not going to go away. And in fact, there should be a national strike too. Amazon workers, walk off your jobs. One day, all of you, just leave the warehouses. Truck drivers. I know it's tough. I know it's a difficult decision, but for one day, just make Jeff Bezos squirm. That would be nice. But it's just sickening to me that we have somebody like Joe Biden, who's the nominee, and I'm curious to see really how this question will play out in regards to defunding the police, how both Trump and Biden will answer it, because it'll be, no, I'm not going to defund the police, or I'm not going to, like, it'll be curious to see, because if there was ever an opportunity that the Democrats are hoping for to win progressives over, Biden maybe answers the question correctly, but because of his actions, because of who he is, because he's unapologetic, he's not going to listen to progressives or independents. But hey, great task force, Bernie Sanders. Yeah. I'm sure the Biden campaign and Democratic centrists are listening loud and clear.
The Democrats don't even pander well. Like, I get that it could be political suicide to say the word defund, because people literally think they're going to wake up tomorrow and there's no police. And since America is based in, like, fear of the other, you know, I think there's this strong attachment to us for a certain population and a voting percentage of the population. But you could use other words like let's cut the budget, let's divest from the police. You know, you don't have to use the word defund, but, you know, that old cliche, if you want to show me your priorities, show me your budget.
Absolutely. And Kira, you're going to have the final word on that. But before we do move on to our next story with Daniel, let's get that video ready for Daniel too, Gunnar. We got a super chat from Jim Critton, $10. Kira's report on education is getting defunded is shocking. The police should be defunded, and education might get a pittance more. We can treat the children, remember them better than that.
You know what's really funny about that whole defunding thing and the worry that they have is, first of all, the fact that, like, we can't overcome this basic language barrier. It shows how pathetic they are, and they're not even trying to begin with. But it's also the same inherent issue they have with Black Lives Matter, because the inherent word that's not in Black Lives Matter that is in it is Black Lives Matter too, or as well, or in addition, or in concurrence.
Also.
But it's everyone knows that they mean, okay, we matter as well, but that it doesn't slogan as well to add that in there. But when Democrats are like, we'll defund the police, we can't do that, that's impossible. Well, you could just say we're reallocating resources away from policing into social services.
Absolutely.
But they don't want to do that because the ultimate point is they don't want to cut the police. They love having a large group of armed people that answer directly to them, just like any good dictator would.